Right. So today I'm going to talk about how do we get from idea in terms of our company, and then as well as how do we get to growth, and what are some of the pitfalls that we experience along the way that I hope you guys that are building your business can try to avoid, so that you can minimize the time wasted and get progress faster. Right. So first things first, I'd like to talk about product market fit. This is something that you've heard 1,000 times, but it just amazed me now that I started to advise a lot of the companies as well, early stage, that a lot of the companies don't have the product market fit. So people are so excited about their solution for the problem, but they forgot that before you even get into the solution, you need to have that product market fit. So some of the questions here that I'd like you to consider as you're building your business is, number one, is do you have the product market fit, right? So don't talk about growth until you have that product market fit. So how do you know that you've got it, right? So don't tell me that it's gut feeling. Gut feeling is one thing, but you need to have the data to prove it out. And I'm the kind of guy who likes the data and like to see the product market fit reflected in the data. So number two is, did you do enough customer discovery and validation? So at Musefind, when we started by interviewing a lot of the shop owners. We started from Startup Weekend. So back in the days, we have a weekend to prove out our ideas. So we have very limited time, and we'd like to maximize our KPI in terms of validation. So we set a target of 20 over the weekend, right? Many people that I advise, I've always advised them to talk to at least 50 people that you think have the same problem, and really validates that problem, really understand why they're having the problem, and what are they doing to solve those problems, right? It's really important to know that the problem exists and it's felt among the people within the same segment, right? Before you try to present the solution to the problem. So when you're doing this customer discovery interviews, make sure that you don't introduce your solution before you understand what their problem that they're experiencing. So linking it back to Musefind, back in 2015, the problem was social media is all over the place. There are people that are bloggers. Back then, influencers are still quite new back then, right? And they don't know. So the problem that we've managed to identify is, the brand and the retailers doesn't know how to work with influencers effectively. So we keep asking what part of it, right? What part of the working with them that they didn't know? So we ended up discovering that you don't know what the process, like how do you go from contacting them to negotiating with them, and then eventually to have a project with them with a set timeline and set budget, right? So they don't know the entire sphere of how to work with influencers. And we discovered that only after we did a conversation with, maybe the 50th customer that we hit the aha moment, right? Before then, we always thought that the hypothesis was that they don't know how to price the influencers, or there is no standardization about the pricing, right? That's our hypothesis, and that's why we were thinking initially to build the marketplace for influencers, not knowingly that they don't have a clue on the whole process, right? So by doing that customer discovery, you really discover the actual problem is that the lack of process and the lack of standardization of the process. And pricing is just one part of it. And it's mostly happening at the end of the funnel, right? Before you discover the influence, like after you discover the influencers and negotiate with them, only then the pricing becomes an issue. So by realizing that, we understand that if we were to solve the pricing issue, then we wouldn't get there, because most of the people will get stuck still in not knowing the process, right? So that's why my point here on number 3 is to really focus on validating the problem before building the solution. Number 4 is, as you are working on to get this product market fit, which is the most crucial part, you need to evaluate yourself objectively. So try to get somebody that is, outside of your day-to-day company or not outside of your co-founder, ideally an advisor or independent person to evaluate, right? So one of the framework that I love to refer to people is the Village Capital viral pathway. So I'll show it in a bit after these couple of slides. So coming back to the product market fit here, this might sound elementary or very basic, but really you need to really think about it in 2 ways, right? So one is your market, right? Does that market exist? You see here in the triangle, the target customer is the basis of everything, right? Only when you have that target customer, and then there is the underserved needs, which is the crucial problem that people are experiencing right now, then you can layer your product on top of it, right? Then it becomes a complete pyramid or a complete triangle, right? So if you just work on your product, right, without working on the market, then what you have is you have not a solid foundation of your company, right? And you can run through it, but in terms of growing it, then you'll have a growing pain problem, and you will have, you'll go through pivots after pivots after pivots, right? Trying to really find the bottom base, while you should have worked on the base first and then layer the product on top. So I hope I nailed down that the importance of product market fit as you go from your idea here. So my other points is never stop iterating, right? So once you've done your product market fit discovery, then you need to build some MVP and so on, right? So what we did at Musefind is, before we even have platform, we have a PDF of the platform with the problem that we have validated through the customer discovery, and then we send this PDF to the potential clients before we lay down any single codes, right? So the reason for that is we want to make sure that this really hits home in terms of the problem, and then in terms of our unique value prop before, and then also we presented the product and the solution there, which is a screenshot of different things, right? So we kind of hack it before we lay down any code or we build any other platforms, right? Like, we want to create the experience of the platform, manually still, right? Using the PDF and a bunch of stitch up, influencers and graphics, right? Before we build it. And then on the right-hand side, after various iteration and feedback, like this is the V2.0 of the platform, and this is not even the final version that we're settling on, right? After 5 years. So we ended up reiterating 3 more times until the current state. So what's my point here? So my point here is that these pivots, or these continuously, talking to the users and getting them to explain to you what their problem is and how our platform, sort of like solve, or your platform solve or not solving the problem, is a continuous iteration process, right? So it will never end. So you just have to get into the habit of having the structure in place to keep iterating, and to understand that your team has to be aware of the continuous customer discovery and continuous search for that product market fit. So moving on to the customer discovery in a bit more detail here, I think I mentioned this before, is number 1, you need to build your hypothesis, right? So, for us, it was, one, brand doesn't know how to negotiate with influencers, right? Number 2, brand feel that influencers are not, returning the ROI that they would like to have from investing in this channel, not like, SEO or SEM, where you can see the return on your investment, right? So you keep building those hypotheses about the problem, right, that the people are experiencing. And then once you have that and you start to go through your customer discovery, then you ask yourself these questions, right? Like, did you talk to the right segment, right? Or did you talk to enough people to confirm your hypothesis? And then again, a quick reminder, don't get too quick on presenting your solution, because what will happen is if you present the solution and the people that you interview, out of the lack of doesn't want to hurt you or wanted to respect for your time or whatever reasons, they will say, yeah, that sounds a great idea. And then you go off and tell the world that, hey, I've got validation here, right? What you've just done is, not a validation of the problem, but you sort of like self-validate the solution. So don't get too excited about presenting the solution first. So this is the viral capital pathway concept here. So it's a bit small, but you can just Google it later. So what it does essentially is it sort of like bring you into different levels based on various team, problem, right, value prop, product market, and a bunch of other areas, right, in terms of your progress as a business. So you'll need to objectively evaluate where you are right now and what does it take to get to the next level, right? So if you are in the setting the vision and solidifying the value prop, then you need to really understand what does it take to get to the next level, right? And most of the startup, until they hit some kind of traction, are going to be in level 3 and level 4 area, right? So in this stage, it's really important to set the timeline and set the goal, right, of the metrics, which I will talk about in a bit, and then know what does it take to grow your team in terms of the scoring, right? Like how to go to the next level in terms of the business model and so on. So take a look at this sort of like methodology and then see where you land in terms of level. The other thing that I would like to talk about in terms of getting to growth from idea is the unique value prop, right? This is standard boilerplate, right? Like, can you boil down your unique value prop after you did the hypothesis, after you did the validation? Can you really boil it down to 1 or 2 simple sentences, right? If somebody just asks you, okay, what does your company do? You need to be able to quickly state it in a very clear way and not being very technical about what you actually do, right? To get to this, some of the process that I advise people to do is to list down your top assets, top strengths, right? And then sort of like revise it along the way, right? Again, my tips number 3 is problem first before the solution. And then you start to build your MVP. As I mentioned before, our MVP is mostly consisting of PDF, nicely designed PDF with step-by-step on guiding the users of what to do, right? When they select the influencers, right? This is the first step. And then we guide them through as if it was a platform, right? But we just have to do it manually over the email first. So this is a graph of how you should build or not build MVP, right? So I'm just going to focus here on how to properly build it. So, how to properly build is that when you have the blueprint of the problem that you're trying to solve. So in this particular case, you're trying to build a vehicle, right? You know from the start, based on your customer discovery, that people need a vehicle, right? So then you start to build very basic vehicle, very basic structure of the vehicle before you start to add a bunch of other layers to become a complete vehicle. So hopefully along the way as you go through your business. But without proper customer discovery and without proper understanding of what the problem is, then you might start to build a bicycle or a scooter, electric scooter, and then you go on to change it to a bike, and then you go on to change it to a motorcycle, right? You're gonna spend a lot of time wasted here if you try to do this, right? It will take a lot of cost, a lot of man hours, a lot of frustration as you do so, right? And a lot of reset. So think about it in a way that before you build your MVP, know the problem, talk to the customer so you know exactly that they want a car, not a bike, right? And then setting up for growth. These are the questions that you need to ask yourself and always question yourself every single time, every day in and day out. right? So what's the engine of growth of your startup, right? Again, don't focus on growth without product market fit. And then, are you tracking the right metrics? What are the top 2 or 3 main metrics that you are tracking? So at Musefind, we track number of collaboration that the brand is doing. And we also track repeat collaboration between brands and influencers, because that is a sign of success, that influencers are actually making a difference to the brand if they continuously go through another campaign with the brand, another campaign with the brand. That means the brand realizes some of the ROIs that the influencers are promising. So revenue is always a lagging indicator, but expense is always a leading indicator. So make sure that as you go through this process, you control your burn and understand that the revenue can come later, but you need to take control of the expenses. Some of the mistakes that I've seen in terms of tracking growth is cumulative versus the real growth. This is the danger of the cumulative chart. As you can see here, this is an example of a revenue chart that's going up, right? As you can see, revenue is going up. We're doing so well. You're going to become a unicorn soon. Not so fast, because when you actually go through a more of a growth perspective, then you can see the growth is actually slowing down, right? So tracking the right metrics, which is growth versus cumulative, is important, because then you'll be able to identify the problem earlier, right? Like in February, where you said, oh, our growth just half, then you need to do something about it, right? Or in March, like our growth from January has just become 30%. So you need to identify and put that early warning signals built into your process. The other ones are quite common in terms of setting the wrong growth metrics. And these are some of the ones that are valid for SaaS companies, as I know SaaS is really the way to go in terms of getting that sustainable revenue stream. So, thinking that bookings are the same as revenue, right? So you're including the verbal agreement, the signed LOI before, as your revenue, even though those are still bookings, right? Those are not correct, because you're setting yourself up for failure in terms of ability to convert, and then your revenue will have like a fluctuation like crazy, right? If you do that. And then, if you have an upfront annual payment, then you're booking them as if it was like, revenue for October, for example, right? That's also not right, because, hey, you're gonna still need to serve the customer over the next 12 months, right? So again, you will end up with a fluctuative revenue, which doesn't reflect the true nature of your business. And then churn is the most favorite topic, right? Like all the investors in SaaS will ask you, what's your churn, right? And then you're giving them a number that's like, oh, is it annual? Yes, it's annual, even though it's monthly, right? So if you're saying if you're telling them that your annual churn is 5%, even though that's the monthly, then you'll end up with close to like almost 60% in terms of annual churn. That's not good, because half of your customers then will have to churn, and then you have to find that almost 60% of new customers to replace the bucket that they exited. Finally, how to build sort of like your forecast to make sure that you can project your growth, right? And that you have the idea of growth. So you can do it both two ways. First is doing it top down. So starting from the later years, from the 5th year, going to the current year, or the second or the third year, right? And you did this. This is all very standard, right? You probably have already very familiar with it. So you need to identify the TAM, SAM, and SOM at the end of the 5 years, right? Using some projections and some data that's available externally. And then you predict how much you're gonna get in terms of market share in the next 3 to 5 years, right? And then you work backward from there to see how fast you need to grow in order to get to that particular market share and to get to that particular dollar value of the market. The second method is the bottoms up method. So here you start from the time 0, which is right now, to the 3rd year, right? So this way you need to know the 3 major KPIs that really drive your business, as I mentioned before. and then show how that KPI translates into revenue. So for us at Musefind, because our model was SaaS, and then we also have the commission-based structure. So one of our metrics that we track is how much the client is spending on influencer marketing, right? So the client have $100,000 of budget, then we'll take 10% cut of that. So then that is one of the very important KPI that we are forecasting and projecting into the future, how much they're going to be spending, right? And then finally, you need to project the cost structure that you need to hit that revenue, right? Like, what are the developer costs, AWS costs that's needed? What are the sort of like the CRM or other software that you need to do? Labor being the biggest and the hardest part, right? So you need to be able to reasonably estimate how many developers you're gonna need, how many salesperson, right, that you're gonna need if you're a SaaS business, right, and how many marketers and so on, right? So you go from the bottoms up, from the time 0 to the 3rd year, and then you connect that with the top-down method that you did from 5th year to the 3rd year. So and then you see whether those two kind of connect or not. All right, so in terms of summary, again, 3 points here. The product market fit is key. So really hone in on this before you even try to grow or even try to scale. Don't shortcut your way into customer discovery. This is the most important and crucial part of your journey as an entrepreneur. And then track the correct growth metrics and be ready when the data has told you that, hey, there's some roadblock here, or things are not aligning as you should be. Be ready to start again and to pivot. Sounds great. So open up for a question.
Thank you very much, Andry. So we do have a couple of questions from you from the audience. What were some of the challenges that you faced early on with your startup, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, so one of the first challenges that we face is sort of like, how do we get the first user, right? Or how do we get the investor? So for us, we are running very lean. So we have to find creative ways to sort of support our businesses while we haven't got the investment from the investor yet, right? So how do we show traction if we get all of these plans, but then we don't have the money to execute yet? So in order to do that, we are really creating the process. Once we have the validation of the customer and all the product market fit confirmed, then what we do is we sort of introduce sort of like a introductory pricing for the customer. So if they invested 3 months up front, we're giving them a discounted, right? So we collect the cash up front. So that cash actually pays for our operational costs, right? So then we can show the traction to the investors by using very little capital. And then once we get into a certain stage, we told them, hey, if we hit 100 customers next month, are you going to be in our round or not, right? And then we strive for that goal. So in a lot of ways, it comes down to setting the expectation and also to prove out that you can hit those milestones to get the investment from the investors that you have been targeting. So that the hardest part is always the capital.
Yeah, very, very well explained. Thank you very much. Another one we have is, what's the most valuable piece of advice that you had received that helped you succeed?
Yeah, so for me particularly, and for our team, it's the notion of growth, right? So in startup, it's a very fast-paced environment. So if you are not growing, then it's pretty much, frankly speaking, then you're dead, right? So in a lot of ways, businesses needs to be on a decline in order to be confirmed as dead. But then in the startup plan, if you're just plateauing, then it's pretty much it's better to not continue than continuing on, right? So the investor really inject this to us, and then that's why every single time we've always focused on growth and how do we grow. Right after we hit that product market fit, how do we grow so that we don't get stuck in a plateau?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Andry, for joining us today. You have given us some fantastic knowledge, and we really appreciate you sharing with us.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, glad to be here.